We are ready.
All right.
Gracias, Federica. No sé si podemos bajar el... Ahí está, listo. Well, Dennis, I'll switch to Spanish now.
Yes, please.
Equipo, bienvenidos a su última sesión del Journey en Desarrollo de Personas. Recordando un poco cuál ha sido su ruta, en una primera sesión ustedes llegaron a comprender un poco más sobre el rol de líder coach, tuvieron una dinámica con distintos mandos medios, pudieron conversar y pudieron hacer uso del modelo Grow para justamente tener esas conversaciones. Luego pasamos al día de ayer, quienes nos pudieron acompañar al webinar de Debbie, en donde nos centramos en conversaciones profundas y o complejas, para luego encontrarnos hoy, junto con Dennis nuevamente, y conversar sobre, o mejor dicho, aplicar lo que hemos aprendido el día de ayer. Como pueden recordar, este es el objetivo de la capacidad, nutrir una cultura de aprendizaje y crecimiento personal en el que las personas son el centro del negocio, y a eso nos hemos dirigido durante estas 3 sesiones. Nuevamente, solo para hacer el reminder, saben que la sesión va a estar liderada por Dennis y en inglés, así que tienen la opción de interpretación para poder escucharlo en español. Tienen la opción también de poder participar en español, porque saben que Dennis también va a tener, o sea, tiene un intérprete que pueda ayudarlo. Y sin más, voy a dar ya el inicio al espacio. So, Dennis, I believe we can start.
Thanks. Thanks, Miri. I'm going to, well, actually, I don't even need that slide. So we have a couple of hours, and in that, we want to do 4 or 5 things. First is, I love listening to Debbie. We could give Debbie 6 hours and it would be interesting, but she did a very short keynote around the big ideas. And so I would want to start with some of your thoughts and reflections, like what really stuck with you from yesterday? What was interesting, either reminded you or you were like, wow, had not thought of it that way. So we'll start with reflections.
Sí, bueno, Dennis se está demorando más de lo normal. Si quieren, vayamos conversando un poquito cómo fue la sesión de ayer. ¿Quién nos quiere contar?
Dale, si quieren empiezo yo.
Dale, Adri.
Adriana. Bueno, a mí algo que me gustó un montón, me quedo con 2 cosas. Uno es el concepto del two ladder, ¿no? Que es el entender realmente cuál es esa escalera de emociones que tiene la otra persona como para empatizar y hacer las preguntas correctas basadas en esta necesidad de entender realmente lo que está pensando la otra persona, ¿no? Y por qué piensa y dice y hace lo que hace, ¿no? Más que tratar de nosotros imponer un punto de vista con una óptica miope, ¿no? Desde nuestro único punto de vista personal. Y lo otro es el joint contribution, que creo que si bien es cierto lo podemos o lo hacemos en algunos casos, el escucharlo como algo conceptual o como un framework, creo que ayuda muchísimo para que lo interioricemos más, ¿no? Y nos enfoquemos en justamente entender cuál es el rol que tuvo cada persona en lo que está sucediendo, ¿no? Y nos enfoquemos en ese cómo podríamos, ¿no? Cómo podríamos resolver lo que está pasando de una manera conjunta y no cómo lo podrías hacer tú como que tratando de desligarnos la responsabilidad, ¿no? No buscando culpables, sino buscando soluciones y responsables en ese proceso, ¿no? Entonces, yo me quedo con esos 2 conceptos.
Excelente, buenísimo, Adri, muchas gracias. ¿Alguien más?
Yo igual creo que lo interesante del Tular fue como algo central que es la empatía, de entender desde el otro lado también las diferentes conclusiones y también reconocer que yo no voy a, por mucha empatía que tenga, no voy a reconocer lo que la otra persona necesariamente está pensando de cada uno de los detalles que conversamos sobre un tema. Y ahí es donde la comunicación se vuelve muy importante. Es preguntar correctamente, es, oye, pero de esto que conversamos, de esto que vimos, yo lo he concluido en esto, o tú que has concluido, tú que has pensado, que has visto, ¿no? Entonces, si bien este concepto de Tular es muy potente, en donde la empatía tiene un rol, creo que no todo lo vamos a hablar solo con empatía, sino con preguntas y con comunicación, ¿no? Eso uno. Y el otro punto que me quedé es, no recuerdo cómo se llamaba el capítulo, pero eran los diferentes tipos de necesidades o emociones que necesita algún colaborador cuando parte de equipos. Afiliación, reconocimiento, autonomía, eran como diferentes niveles, como una especie de pirámide de Maslow de necesidades de los que uno debería también cubrir y estar pendiente a la hora de interactuar con el equipo.
Excelente. Gracias, Arturo. Renzo, ¿querías decir algo?
Sí, yo me quedé con algo bien sencillo, pero también bastante potente. O sea, parece evidente, pero en las conversaciones difíciles están presentes los sentimientos. O sea, uno a veces piensa de que por estar, digamos, en un entorno profesional o ser muy objetivo, muy racional, como que todo se va a ir estrictamente a la razón, a los números, ¿no? A la lógica. Sin embargo, eh, partir, digamos, de tomar conciencia de que hay sentimientos en las personas, en los grupos humanos, por otros temas incluso que pueden incluso salir de lo que sucede en la organización, creo que es una base importante, ¿no? Ya sobre esa conciencia uno puede construir con todas las técnicas que hemos venido revisando.
Totalmente de acuerdo. O sea lo que sea el tema, por más numérico, racional que sea, seguimos siendo seres humanos y seguimos teniendo emociones al respecto, preocupaciones. No, además que venimos todos, no es que dejamos la vida personal en la casa y allá se quedó todo y llegamos acá como personas diferentes, sino que seguimos siendo los mismos. Sobre todo en estas épocas, ¿no? De tanta incertidumbre, de tanta, bueno, ya estamos saliendo, pero los últimos 2 años han sido como de muchas emociones, de montaña rusa de emociones en donde han estado tal vez muy presentes y la gente ha estado muy sensible, ¿no? Y hemos estado como con muchas preocupaciones al mismo tiempo, así que concuerdo 100% contigo, Renzo, que es muy importante tener en cuenta como la emoción del otro y es tal vez un nivel de empatía como mucho más profundo, ¿no? De entender cómo se siente el otro más allá de cómo piensa o cómo está enfocando la situación. Gracias, Renzo. ¿Alguien más? Jimmy, ¿ibas a decir algo? Estás en mute.
Sí, estaba viendo acá con problemas porque no se prendía mi micrófono. Yo coincido mucho con lo que comentó Adri de la escalera. Yo me quedé mucho también con eso y me quedé con esa pregunta o esa reflexión que ella hacía de no necesariamente porque estoy yo bien o yo estoy mal y tú bien, sino porque estamos pensando y viendo lo diferente, ¿no? Eso es algo que, esa es una reflexión que también se me quedó mucho y me gustó y me la llevé.
Excelente, Jimmy, muchas gracias. Dennis, welcome back.
Thank you. So sorry. I had total internet failure. That's how long it takes to come back to life, apparently, at my house.
It's okay. We were talking about the reflections and the main points that they have about the last session with Debbie. We talk about
y estábamos hablando también sobre
joint contribution, two ladder, also about empathy, the importance of the empathy and to go
deep. You can do this in Spanish if you want.
Okay. También hablamos sobre la empatía y como de ir más allá, ¿no? De no solamente ponerse en el lugar del otro, sino entender las emociones del otro, ¿no? De que a pesar de que estemos hablando de temas laborales o muy racionales o muy enfocados en el número, pues seguimos siendo seres humanos y tenemos emociones atrás de todo esto.
Fantastic. Well, again, my apologies for my departure. It was not my, would not be how I'd like to go. if you would, Federica, drop the link into the chat. I was probably saying, hey, here's what we're going to do. And then I was gone. And so here's what we're going to do. We're going to do some of these reflections. I'm going to ask you some specific questions now about your red list and your green list, our own personal red list and green list. And then I'd like you to pull up a fresh worksheet for our difficult conversations. This is Debbie's worksheet. Federica just has put it into the chat, and so you can grab a clean copy, because as Hime was just doing the warm-up conversation, we want you to take a conversation that either you are in the middle of or that you are preparing for that you know is going to be hard. One that you know is going to be difficult. And it may be, well, it should be both important for AliCorp and personally important for you that it goes well, right? So it should be a meaningful, difficult conversation. So I'm just noting that now, so you have a minute to pull it up on a device so you can take a look at it, because what we're going to do is just walk through the big ideas, and several of those we just talked about with Hime, and have you start filling out your worksheet with taking a little bit more time now and a little bit more thought, and then we're going to put you into a breakout to share some different stories with 2 others. So we'll be in some small groups of threes and fours to get into, here's how I'm thinking about it. What other ideas do you have? So we're going to walk through the big ideas. We're going to get you into a breakout to do a little peer-to-peer coaching. And also, it's just good time for us to pause and think for a minute, to slow down our busy day and say, how will I prepare for this so that it goes a little bit different than perhaps it would, or it looks like I've already prepared pretty well. It's a nice check. So that's where we're going. And then after the breakout, as we have time, I'll do a little segment on advanced listening skills. So remember last time when I did coaching, we did kind of advanced coaching skills. And then this time, if we have time at the end, we'll do sort of the really advanced listening skills. And that'll be a lot of fun for me. I will try to make sure it's also fun for you. So let me ask you this. This is also just for our your reflection as a group, our reflection as a class. And so, let's see if we, oops. All right, so the words, and my apologies, so I could make sure I understood those. Those are in English now. But when we talked yesterday, we said at our best, there were a set of ideas on the left, from being empathetic to being open and to being sympathetic. And on the right, sometimes we get triggered and we're not at our best. And in there, we are a little insecure, judgmental. We're not prepared. I remember unprepared came up several times for people, like I just wasn't quite ready for what we got into here, or closed off. And so I just like to open up the microphone to hear your thoughts about, these were the 2 questions that Debbie put in the very beginning. And she said, if you only get one thing from the 2 hours yesterday, what is it that triggers me from my green list to the red list? What is it that sets me off or moves me in a not so great place? And then what's one thing that you can do to pull yourself back to the green list? And so now that you've had a chance to start thinking about yesterday and chat about it and hear from some of your colleagues, listen to Debbie, I'd like to just hear from you. What is it that triggers you and moves you from green to red? And then what is one thing that you've been thinking about that can help move you back to the green side? What do you think?
Paradigms, sometimes.
Say again, please.
Paradigmas.
Mm-hmm. And Adriana, could you say more? Is that just like the orthodoxies, the things I believe to be true, like suddenly I'm
Exactly.
surprised? Yep, please go ahead.
Exactly. Could be that we would think that we always have, not always, but what we think is the norm or the normal things, and what the other person think could be not as good as what we think. And we can also have some paradigms about some kind of situations, and this could block us to be in a more open mindset.
I'm used to these going a certain way, and then when you disrupt that pattern, suddenly I might not be so open because I've been surprised in some way. I love that. And I was talking to the head of HR at Jordan, at the Jordan brand at Nike, and they're back to work. They're back to campus, and she says people are calling me with questions, and they're calling me with questions like this, which is, I feel like I don't live in a safe neighborhood, and so I'm worried about the walk to the bus to come back to work. Now, the head of HR is thinking, why are you talking to me about your bus ride? Right? I'm kind of worried. I'm worried about you when you're here, but I'm not sure I can help get you here. Right? So, but it is what the workforce is thinking about in a hybrid model. And it is what's on their mind and what they care about. And so her first reaction wasn't positive. Right? She had to stop and pause and think for a minute. Well, okay, that is actually what people are concerned about coming back to work now. Is the walk to the ride to the bus. Please, feel.
For example, like as a human being, it's like a challenge not to take it personal. So how
yes.
come in the green to red? Yeah, the emotions are key, for example, for empathetic way, like that is good, but trying to avoid to take it personal. Yeah, I think that's one that it's so usual to see.
And Theo, something we don't often talk about is most of the people on this call, does everybody know the difference between a type A personality and a type B? So, okay, so type A personality are super driven. They're executives. We want completion. If something doesn't get done, it bothers us. It is, if we were jogging, we think, well, tomorrow I actually need to go a little further. And the next day I need to go a little further. And we set markers and we set benchmarks and we set goals. And then we feel the accomplishment, right? That's a type A personality who are driven. Most executives exhibit some type A. Type B is more of that California surfer. I don't know if it's a Peruvian surfer or a California surfer, right? But it is, if I don't get to it today, it's not the end of the world. I'll get to it tomorrow. And if I don't get to the meeting on time, it's okay, they'll start without me, right? That's a little more type B, a little more relaxed about structure, rules, and drive. So the thing is, as a psychologist, I will say type A leaders, we always have this little voice in our head. And this little voice in our head says, I'm not good enough. I didn't do enough. I could have done more. I could have gone faster. We could have made more money there. And we often perseverate. I'm not sure what the translation is, but we often and then we can't let it go, right? We hang on to it. And so I think the idea that it's hard not to take it personal is also, if you're very driven, your first instinct is to take it personal. Your first instinct is, oh, that was my fault. Now, I don't think Debbie covered this, but most of us lean towards one of two approaches. We're either blamers or absorbers, right? We tend to put accountability on others, or we absorb it and take it ourselves. But most of us, and many of you, my experience at AliCorp is many of us are absorbers. And so the conversation gets difficult, and then our reaction And is my pace okay? Is everybody following okay? Yeah. So blamers and absorbers. And so the absorbers, the situation gets difficult, the conversation gets hard, and then we say, oh, you know what? It was all my fault. I should have let you know. It's all me. I should have done that differently for you. My mistake, right? When we know it's mutual attribution, both people played a part in it. But if we're an absorber, our instinct is to take it all ourselves. No, that was my fault, my mistake. I will make sure I fix it. If anybody's feeling uncomfortable now, you're probably more of an absorber. Yep, that's me. And now a blamer is like, well, that's right. It is all your fault. You should have done something, right? So that's the other side of that. And then we all have a tendency to one side of that story or the other. And the idea, again, of don't take it personally is be realistic about what's true in this situation. It's going to be mutual attribution. You are not all at fault, but neither are they. And it's in the messy middle that things happen. So sorry, Shio, but I think it's a really important point for really effective executives, because we tend to say, oh, my fault, oh, I'll take the blame. And that can't be the answer.
Totally agree, Dennis.
What else triggers us from green to red, or what's one thing we do to bring ourselves back to green?
Dennis, in my case, something that happens with me to go from effective to ineffectiveness is when I'm not focused, when I am on a conversation and my mind has other things to think about. So that makes me ineffective.
And is it, I'm not attentive like I'm not present?
That my mind is thinking other things also.
Yeah.
At the same time. So it's, even though I'm prepared, I do my homework the night before, but in that moment, my mind is thinking other things. My WhatsApp is ringing, so I'm not focused on the moment. So.
Yeah. So there's one piece of that is, and I promise you, that's not just you. There's a lot of us. There's a lot of us like that. One part of that is sometimes we're easily distracted because there are many pressures and demands on us, and so we think we can multitask, and we're not always as effective as we can. But the other thing here's also the tricky part about type A leaders, people who are driven, is type A leaders tend to live in the future. So here's this is the hard part about being present. Sunday night, your head's in Monday morning. Monday morning, you're thinking about Wednesday afternoon. Wednesday afternoon, you're thinking about the meeting on Friday. So you're always living slightly in the future, which means you're not present in the time that you're in. And so it's not just distracted, it's that we tend to be thinking ahead. And so therefore, our cortisol levels, our stress levels stay high because we're always worrying ahead. And then when our cortisol levels are high, we have more trouble being focused and present, and we're living in the future, which is hard to. So there's a few things that happen in there about being present is not as easy as it's not just like put your phone down. It is, you actually have to quiet your mind and focus it. Yeah, it's not easy. It is not easy.
Yeah.
That's a great point. One more. Anything else you're thinking? What triggers us, or what do we use to bring us back? I'll tell you one of the things I use to bring me back. So sometimes if I get triggered on a call, and sometimes I'm on a call and it's suddenly clear to me that despite me talking about something 3 times to this person, it's like all new to them. That's one of those things that just sets me off, right? Now, some of you know, he may and others may know, I used to be a police officer. I used to be a cop long ago. And so I don't I don't have a very expressive affect. I don't have a very expressive emotional face. So this is me when I'm happy. This is me when I'm not happy. And this is me when I'm upset and frustrated. So it's hard to see. And some of you are more expressive than I am. But so people may not always see that I get triggered. I'm like, damn it, I think I told you this 3 times. Why are we still talking about the same thing? So what I do is I have to look over here. Can you see? So I have a dog. I have a dog under my desk. And then if I think, you know what, the fact that they didn't know it 3 times is not the end of the world, I'm going to go pet my dog and give myself a little moment out of time. But find those things for you. I know one executive who has a picture of his boat. He has a little sailboat, and then whenever he gets frustrated, I can see him looking up at the wall. So I know he's looking at the picture of his boat. But find those little things that help bring you back, right? Help shorten that refractory period, but help bring you back to the green list, give you a little space so that you are more effective. Don't just fight through it, right? But find some little ways. I don't know, in English, when I'm coaching, I often call those speed bumps. But what's the little speed bump that's going to slow you down for a second and give you a minute to reset and get to the green list? Any questions or observations here? This is hugely fun for me. I just want to make sure it's a little bit fun for you too, as we're going through.
Hello. Welcome back.
Again, thank you. I've switched networks, so I'm hoping that I have a more stable connection now.
They are working on what's the problem in the worksheet. You are mute.
Did you talk through some of the big ideas or not yet?
No. We only start with thinking about the situation while we are waiting.
All right. Well, does everybody remember this? This is one of my favorite slides that Debbie does, right? When we think about this idea of the inner voice. And so I think one of the big ideas as we start thinking through, can I make a hypothesis about how big is the gap in this conversation I'm about to come into? Is the gap large or is the gap small? How would I know? I think that becomes a pretty interesting one, because if I come in and I am pretty unhappy about this, and I don't necessarily want to say that to the other person, my gap is going to be pretty large. I need to probably think about how I'm going to manage that coming in. And if they've been careful about, I understand they're probably not happy because they're not getting something. We may have to talk a bit about what's going on with you, right? Is their gap large or small? But you should make a hypothesis. You may not know because you haven't been in the conversation, but what's your hypothesis about it? I think that's kind of, as we start thinking about what's the issue, we should be making a quick snapshot judgment about what's the gap. And then Debbie talked through this in some detail, which I love, and that is, we have our own ladder. We looked at a set of data. We picked a set to pay attention to, and then we put some interpretation or reasoning against that data. We have a story that we tell about it, like we've done our logical analysis, and this is why it makes sense. And that led us to a conclusion. So us understanding, you'll see in your worksheet that next segment says, what data did I pick? And then what data could I imagine that they picked? And so how do I just start to slow down their ladder of inference and start identifying the data that we both looked at was probably the same data. The data we selected to pay attention to is probably different. And then obviously the interpretation we gave to it and the conclusion that we came to are quite different. And so that's usually where all the action is on the ladder of inference. So take a few notes, as you'll see at the bottom on your worksheet. about what's my data and their data. Again, you won't know if you haven't talked about it, but you probably have some ideas about their data, about how they got there. So take a few notes on that. And as you are doing that, I think Debbie said this, but I think it also bears repeating. That is the magic of a difficult conversation. The way that they go very well is first, you have to inquire down their ladder. You have to understand how they got there before you have permission to advocate up your ladder. So before you explain your view, you need to do the work to understand how they got there, right? That is the magic. If you try to do it the other way, we create defensiveness. It takes more time. It cycles, it spins in some different ways. So you inquire down theirs before you advocate up yours. So just take a moment now, make a few notes. My data, their data, how did they get there? And thank you, Hime, while I relocated to more stable time, more stable location. And then sometimes it's not easy to know how to start. Like it's not easy to know how to start to inquire down their ladder of inference. And so here's some starter questions. Debbie talked through these very quickly yesterday, but I just wanted to slow down a minute and say, you know, I think she loves the question, what might I be missing? Hey, what haven't I thought about here, you know, in terms of how you got to your position? But look at these and see if a couple of these make sense for you. So as you start to inquire down somebody else's ladder of inference, what are a couple of questions you can use to start things off? Sometimes you can just ask them directly. If you have some trust and you know them, you can just ask them directly. So why do we see this so differently? And they'll tell you. But sometimes you don't have the relationship or the time and the history. Then I think it's like, what's helpful for me? What am I missing here? And sometimes if it is about more, if it's personnel issues or it's about style or team effectiveness or team dynamics, you might be into some of these lower questions like, well, what experience have you had that informs your thinking, you know? And so what was the impact on you when the team made this decision? What was the impact on you? There are other ways you can start getting them to describe how they got there. So those are our starter questions. We inquire down and then we have the permission to advocate back up. And let me tell you how I got there. And now suddenly we're much closer to the idea of joint contribution, mutual attribution, right? That is, we each contributed to this. So how do we move forward? And you'll remember the big idea here that Debbie talked about was the purpose of blame is punishment. And so if we go into the meeting, like trying to figure out who's to blame, everybody knows blame leads to punishment of some kind. And there are many ways that shows up at work. But if we come into the conversation to talk about the joint contribution, what did I contribute and what did you contribute to this, then suddenly we are here to solve this together, right? The purpose is going to be joint problem solving and how do we improve the situation. So part of this is mindset, and part of this, like how I come in thinking, right? From a growth mindset, from a place of us together on the same side of the table. And some of it is the way we frame our questions. Like, don't say, why did you do that? That's probably not the best way to open. I'm just kidding. I know you wouldn't do that. All right. And then Debbie talked about these, so I'm not going to go over these in great detail. The idea here is sometimes we aren't so clear that we had a contribution. Like I was totally surprised by this. I was totally blindsided. But sometimes we're too busy. Sometimes we are using email instead of a phone call. And sometimes And sometimes if you look at this very last bullet, there are just some different assumptions, some cultural assumptions. So for example, when I'm working with the Jordan team at Nike, the Jordan team can sign an athlete or an artist. They can go ahead and start framing up the shoes or the apparel that they want to attribute to that artist, and they can go fast, and they can be moving within a month or two. But Nike, the broader organization, cannot move that fast, right? You are not going to get a brand new set of shoes through the Nike distribution system in a month or two. So there are just different cultural assumptions in the functions in the field, or in the field versus supply chain. And so sometimes these difficult conversations just happen because there are different clock speeds with different elements of the organization. And it may not be that I was busy. It just may be that actually, if I'm an audit, there are 10 things that are more on fire than yours. And somebody feels like they're not getting good service. And that could be the heart of a hard conversation. All right. So on your worksheet in sections 2 and 3, try to put a couple notes in. What did we each contribute to the problem? Is it that I wasn't paying enough attention? I should have been clearer with you. And then make a note, like why I did that, right? It just, you're one of 10 things on my list. And so I wasn't as attentive to your issue, or why might they have done that? We'll just take a couple notes and then we're going to get into the breakout here. And then the last one, which is always, I think, very interesting, is make a couple notes on the relational interests that get stepped on. And fairness is always a big one. It's last on the list, but it's always a big one. Like somebody feels like they haven't been treated fairly. So what are your views about what one or two relational interests of theirs got stepped on? What is going to have them what's created a strong reaction in them? And what are one or two of yours, right? What are a couple things that you're kind of annoyed about, or you're upset about, you may not show it in the meeting, but there's things that bother you. And what is it? Is it about appreciation or affiliation or status, right? So is it status? You're treating me like I work for you. That's not going to be making me feel very, positive about this. Or the idea of autonomy or role, that is, I thought this was my decision, or I thought I was always involved in these decisions, but it doesn't look like I was. Those are some of the things that get stepped on here. Or just fairness. It doesn't feel like I'm being treated fairly here. So make a couple notes on what you think is behind their reaction, if it's strong, and what is yours coming in. Is there some of the relational interests that I have that have been stepped on as well? It's usually the case when it's a hard conversation, both sides, there's something that we're like, that does not feel like that's fair. It does not feel like that is an appreciation, or does not feel collaborative. All right, so feelings that are present for them or me. And then here's what we want to do. I just want to get you've had a chance to look at your worksheet and go through, start to fill out some things. So we've been able to slow down some of the thinking for ourselves to prepare for this difficult conversation. But what's always helpful is to gather some others' views. So we want to get you into some small groups, have you share the frame of your difficult conversation and get other people's perspectives. You'll always hear something you hadn't thought of, or you'll be reminded of something. You're like, yeah, absolutely, don't forget, right? That they're under just as much pressure as you, or their boss is really pushing them for, whatever that is that you'll get in this conversation. All right, so let's go ahead, Federica, with all of my stops and starts. Let's get people into a 30-minute breakout. It sounds like a long time, but it's really about 10 minutes each. And in that 10 minutes, let's spend 5 or 6, like saying, here's my story, and then 5 or 6 into discussion. Just like, hey, what do you think? Any thoughts or observations?
Thank you, Dennis. It's all set in group of 3, 30 minutes, and please, disculpen. Cualquier consulta que tengan, no duden en contactarnos a través de apretar el botón Help. Y Denis o yo o Jimena pueden asistirlos en su sala. Nos vemos entonces en 30 minutos y les voy a estar enviando algunos recordatorios para que puedan ir terminando las conversaciones antes de que cumpla el tiempo. Gracias.
The last little bit and then get this back in Mitty's hands, but the advanced listening skills. And John Richardson, who is a colleague of Debbie's and a friend of mine, he teaches at MIT, he teaches negotiation, but interestingly, John also teaches hostage negotiation with Chris Voss, who is an ex-FBI hostage negotiator. And one of the interesting things from, pardon me, Chris's book is the level of skill that hostage negotiators listen at. It's quite extraordinary. They're super precise. And so what I thought I'd do is just go through these 5 listening skills. And it's just sort of the advanced class on listening. These are many things you do already naturally. But let's see if there are some of these that you think, maybe I could tune up my skills a little bit. And then if you have questions along the way, please do ask them. All right. So this one you all know, and we talk a lot about this in coaching, which is how we think about open-ended questions, right? So for sure, open-ended questions is the way we get more information about the context, how the person's feeling, what the situation is. It's one of the ways we prepare is just asking good open-ended questions. But the other thing that good open-ended questions do is they direct people's attention in a very specific way. So the questions you ask guide them to the area or topic that you want to make sure you talk about, right? So it isn't just how are you, but it's, hey, tell me more about, and then you will frame and guide your conversation in very specific ways. And even if you're guiding them with your question, it gives the people the freedom to shape their own answer. So they don't feel like they're being, forced in a direction. But if we're thoughtful about our questions, it allows us to move the conversation where we want to. And then open-ended questions don't just have to be about, tell me more. They can also be, give me an example of, and tell me about the time when that happened, right? So we get examples, we get stories, and that gives people the freedom also to just express themselves and tell you how it felt, and maybe put words to something that they're having trouble expressing, right? Because sometimes people can, through a story, you can hear where it is that things went off the tracks. So open-ended questions, they do more than just prepare us well, they actually help us guide. Minimal encouragers, almost all of you do this, but these are those little things we say during a conversation, like, okay, sure, wow, oh, I see, right? It's those little words that sit just below our level of consciousness. People don't realize you're doing it, but we all do it. And the exact words aren't important, but it turns out the research shows that what is important is your tone of voice. If you sound interested, if you sound encouraging, and you sound calm, then that's what people react to, right? Whenever my wife comes home to tell me about her afternoon, and I say, yeah, okay, sure, yeah. Whenever the research, and you can do this at home as well, right? The research is pretty clear that using minimal encouragers will get someone to talk twice as long in the conversation. It just encourages them to continue giving you some more information. And again, people don't realize we do it, but the best listeners do this with some deliberate nature. Number 3, mirroring. Mirroring is when, let's say, Adriana says, geez, I have to have a conversation with my direct report about a promotion that they didn't get. And then I can choose what are the 1 or 2 words I want to say when she says that. And I'll say promotion. And then she'll tell me more about why the promotion is hard. Or if she says that and then I say, oh, it's a direct report, someone on your team, then she'll tell me more about the team. And then she'll tell me about the promotion as well. But the mirroring, which is repeating 1 or 2 of the person's words at the end, actually helps you guide the conversation in ways that are not immediately obvious. Or hard, why is that going to be a hard conversation? And then Adriana's going to tell me what's difficult about it. I really like this person, but they're not, but the idea that we repeat a couple of words, and if we're very thoughtful about which words they are, it helps us guide where we want to hear more about in the conversation. So for example, this is one of John and Chris's. Let's imagine this was a hostage situation and you heard the hostage taker say, look, I want a car in 10 minutes or I'm going to shoot a hostage. So what's the word that we want to emphasize from that? What's the word we want to mirror?
The car.
Car, right? I can talk all day about the car. I don't want to talk about shoot. I don't want to talk about hostage, right? And I don't want to talk about 10 minutes, but I do want to talk about car. So I want a car in 10 minutes or I'm going to shoot a hostage. Car, what kind of car? And then we guide the conversation to the area, right, that we want to make the progress in, or we want to hear more about and keep the conversation focused on. So that's mirroring, and I'm just watching our time, so I'm going through these pretty quickly. Mirroring is super powerful. Again, it sits right below people's consciousness, and so we often don't realize it's happening. And related to mirroring, but a little bit different, is paraphrasing. Because in mirroring, if I say back a word or two at the end, I actually don't have to listen. I could just repeat back a couple words at the end. And this happens sometimes with my wife, where she'll be saying something, I will mirror back a word or two, and I really was not listening. And then suddenly I'm having to go to dinner with some people that I really didn't want to go to dinner with because I agreed to something and I wasn't paying attention. And so I think mirroring, you have to be careful that you're actually listening. And then paraphrasing is quite different. That is where I create a quick little summary of what you said. And so paraphrasing, Adriana says, I have to give feedback to this person who's not going to get a promotion, who's worked very hard for it. And then I'll say, it sounds like it's going to be hard because they're going to get some news they weren't expecting about not get the promotion. And then she's going to say, that's right, or that's correct. But the paraphrasing allows me to show my understanding, and it encourages them to tell me more. And sometimes, to the third bullet here, sometimes it allows you to redirect their attention. And so Adriana says, look, they're not going to get the promotion. They worked very hard at it. They're going to take it hard. So I want to handle it carefully. And then I'm going to say, boy, sounds like you want to make sure you retain and keep their motivation. It's not exactly what she said, but I'm guiding the conversation in a little bit different direction to something it sounds like is probably one of the reasons behind it. So paraphrasing, people give you a lot of leeway in paraphrasing. If you get it right, it's affirming to them. If you get it mostly right, but are moving in a certain direction, people will usually agree. And if you get it wrong, people are usually happy to correct you. And they'll say, no, actually what I meant is that someone else is going to get promoted, but this person won't. And so it's going to be retention risk. So if you paraphrase, people are usually very happy to give you credit for trying and then correct you to make sure you're clear. So paraphrasing, super powerful. And then finally, this is the one you have to be most careful about, which is emotional emotional labeling, right? What is hugely powerful and positive about emotional labeling is if it's a hard conversation, it's usually the emotions and the relationship that are most important part of the story. And so how do we surface that and talk about it is very powerful. So how do I name it? Because if I can name it, then people feel heard. Like, yeah, I am upset about that, or no, I am frustrated about that. And sometimes it helps their awareness. And so sometimes somebody could come in very angry or very defensive, and they don't think they are. And so sometimes us labeling it and saying, you sound pretty upset, or and then it lets them check themselves. You know, am I? If I'm sounding that way to you, maybe, you know, lets them think about their own, might kick in their own coping. And so the trick here, though, is if somebody is triggered or in their refractory period, telling them they're angry, right, when they're very angry, not always helpful, right? Like telling my wife she seems really angry with me, right, when she's very angry with me, is not going to make it better. The experience tells me that. This is the best humor you're going to get from me today. So I think emotional labeling is powerful, but you have to use it carefully. You have to use it carefully. All right, so those are sort of 5 big ideas, and I want to get this over to Miri, but I would say this: leadership, listening skills, skills to have powerful conversations that are difficult in their very nature. I mean, leadership changes everything, right? For the good or for the bad. And so these are powerful techniques, and I'm just saying use them for good, right? These are not the techniques to use to manipulate people, to do what you want, right, against their will. These are the ways to have the best positive outcome on some difficult situations. So use your superpowers for good, and be deliberate in your preparation, and those will go so much better. Miri, let me stop and make sure you have a few minutes.
Thank you, Dennis. Equipo, antes de pasar ya a la última parte, quería agradecerles por su participación, comentarles que los materiales, la información sobre lo que se viene, que vendría a ser el Taking It Home, que es básicamente aplicar las herramientas que hemos aprendido en estas sesiones, el modelo PRO, ¿no? La forma de dar feedback, el worksheet que hemos visto sobre Difficult Conversations, todo ello lo van a aplicar en el Taking It Home. Igual mayor detalle lo van a tener en el correo que van a recibir entre hoy y mañana. ¿Cuánto tiempo vamos a tener para poder resolver el Taking It Home? 3 semanas. Sin embargo, ustedes ya saben que cualquier complicación de agenda, aquí estamos a su disposición, tanto Mapi como yo, para poder ayudarlos. Quiero agradecer a Denis por la facilitación de hoy también, a Jime, a Federica, a nuestro intérprete para acompañarnos. Y nos quedan 2 minutos, así que los dejo con Mapi para una cosita súper chiquita y nos vamos.
Perfecto, gracias. Buenos días con todos. Ya como para poder cerrar el espacio, vamos a compartir una pequeña encuesta de satisfacción. Estoy compartiendo el código QR. Me confirman por favor si lo pueden visualizar. Y por el chat también estoy compartiendo el enlace que los lleva directamente al formulario. Bueno, les agradecemos a todos su participación. Igual, una vez que tengamos completa esta encuesta, ya nos podemos retirar de la sesión. Así que muchas gracias a todos por la participación y esperamos que puedan responder la encuesta. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, equipo.
Super slick. Very nice. Thank you, everybody. So good to see you.
Gracias, chao.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much to you, Denise.
Thank you, Denny.
Chao. Gracias.